that we're ready to roll with Jamie motherfucking Wheal back again. The first podcast was so epic, and now we have an entire Burning Man to talk about, as well as everything else. Welcome back, brother.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I've definitely been saving any thoughts on this topic until we got together. So
I'm fucking so excited because we got to hang for a brief second out there on the playa. But give us your thoughts, man. Let's just dive into this thing here.
Yeah, for sure. So I ended up I had a string of talks about stealing fire on the playa, which was super fun.
Yep.
And the last one was on Friday at Red Lightning, which, as you know, is one of kind of the main camps on the Esplanade. And some of the folks that have, at least in my experience, I think in a lot of people's understanding, have done the most to bring the principles, ethos, and applications of Burning Man out into the real world. I would say those guys, along with Burners Without Borders, they're certainly some of the folks that we featured in the book. And they played an active role on the Dakota Pipeline stuff. They actually brought in a bunch of Lakota and other indigenous elders. And they host just generally an incredibly nice, tightly dialed camp with really conscious, deliberate, sort of actionable programming, versus just kind of the raging party side of it.
Yep.
And on that Friday afternoon, I found myself, kind of off script as usual, and basically just saying, hey, we're at the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love, right? And so there's all, there's that museum exhibit in London and all those kind of things. And just thinking back to 1967, and that there was, in fact, the Diggers, I think, and Ken Kesey, some of those guys back in the day, they actually held a ceremony for the death of the hippie. And they actually paraded down Haight-Ashbury. They paraded down the street with a casket and had a ceremonial burial of the hippie.
Now, wait, were these people who are hippies who were burying the hippie? Yeah.
Exactly. And they basically said, hey, by the time it's got this mainstream, it's done.
Yeah.
And so that's what I said on Friday at Burning Man. I was like, guys, I think this should be the last burn. I think we've conducted this fucking experiment for 30 years. It's been radically awesome. It's created all kinds of novelty, and yet I am seeing signs everywhere around, particularly this year, of effectively cultural / moral decay.
So that's like when you have a shirt like Ed Hardy or Affliction, and it's cool for a minute, and then everybody starts wearing it, and it just all the people who are wearing it like it. Yeah. And you're like, this doesn't mean what it used to anymore.
Yeah, I think Gladwell did that in The Tipping Point with like Skechers or something, right? How they went to become the Keds of the next generation. And so that to me is like, that's the open inquiry. And obviously it is a cliched meme in itself to say Burning Man is ruined. I mean, there's even, there's funny ass posts that lots of people have put about it, like, Burning Man was ruined when, way, all the way back from every single year, why and how it's ruined. Right. So I want to kind of inoculate against that. There we go. that somewhat tired trope, and actually take a little bit more of like a sort of cultural anthropological assessment.
Yeah,
like what are the trends? What's so awesome about the place? And then also what might be shifting and potentially irrevocably, which I don't think is a time for hand wringing. It's just a time for objective analysis and assessment. Is that cool?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. And I would say so. What was interesting that I saw this year, even I've only been 2 years, and I could actually see a bit of a difference this year. And I think it started last year with the gluing of the doors of that one camp, the White Ocean camp. And as we were walking through, we took the Playa shuttle and we had luggage and pretty girls in tow with suitcases.
Yes, you did. I saw your guys' video. Colin just sent it to me last night.
Yeah. So we're huffing our way, through down the streets. And as you go from kind of the back streets towards the front camps, because we were in the Playa Alchemist, which is that giant pyramid, also hosted some cool talks and some cool things. But that is called a plug and play camp, which is a slur.
Yeah.
Which is like the dirtiest slur in Burning Man. So as we were walking, we were getting like jeers from people.
Oh, no
as
way.
we're going through. So
like with your roll-on luggage. And clearly
just
flew in.
And pretty girls and the whole thing. Like, oh, you guys going to a plug and play, I bet, huh? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Like, and it was really interesting because the idea of Burning Man is radical inclusion.
Yes.
But even in that context, they couldn't help but try to claim superiority of their ego over these other, change the rules of the game so that they were superior, so that us were inferior to them on a moral level because we were going to a plug and play and they were the real burners.
Yes.
Right. So creating division in a place that is supposed to be about radical inclusion and being completely unawares
of the performative contradiction of that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And just to set context, so you mentioned that was your second time. So you got to see a little bit of one data point compared to another data point.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize is that I hadn't actually truly been to a full week of Burning Man since 2014. So last year we flew in and out. We were just there for 3 days. We didn't think we could go. And then friends just said, come crash with us. So we very much had a 72-hour just in and out window, which was just us in our little bubble with our closest friends. And so I didn't really get a sense of the broader culture and the dynamic. So I realized, I'm actually looking at like a 3-year, 4-year lag from when I last really took a bite of the apple. And on top of that, we took our 18-year-old son for his first time. So I was also looking at it from the lens of a parent, and I was also looking at it from the lens of, and not so much a parent like in a protective sense, but a parent in the sense of like, what is he getting from this? And is he seeing and experiencing all the things that made it so profoundly meaningful to his mother and father from back in the day? So first of all, to give like full props, and the reason we wrote about it in Stealing Fire, the reason we've continued to go back and had it be a part of our life and extend part of that community is, I think without reservation could say, I think it's one of the more powerful, large-scale transformative rituals on the planet in this era.
No fucking doubt, and it still was for me this year, despite the faults. It still was. And from the first time that I went to the times that Julie and I went, it has been absolutely central in the sort of next most interesting chapters of our personal and developmental and imaginal, creative, magical lives. Yep.
So in like an irreducible debt of gratitude to the place and the process.
Yep.
Now that said, I was just on Amazon because there was and I think this is relevant because we were at some of the Dead shows with John Mayer this summer. And got to hang out backstage and talk to those guys and sort of get an experience of that and realize, and again, took our son. He was just turned 18. We're like, hey, buddy, come and check out. Like here, like this is where we began.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the summer was Burning Man. So it was kind of like a neat bookend of transformative psychedelic culture over the last 50 years. So it was really cool to get to experience that. And I realized, like we only caught the tag end of live Grateful Dead shows back in the day, and arguably when that whole scene was in total decline. Yeah. Basically late 80s, early 90s, Jerry was in and out of hospital comas and then ultimately kicking it, right? And yet, to me, the hands down most righteous live musical experience I've ever had, and I think probably will ever have, was like fall 1991 Jerry Garcia band shows. And that live streaming album, which if anybody's interested is now available on Amazon, it's been out of print for years, is he plays Dylan tunes, he plays Motown tunes, he's got an incredible band, like wailing, like Hammond B3, like 3 gorgeous gospel singer backup, like it just fucking slays. And that was at the arguable back end decline,
but it's still so damn good.
And it was the best. And I would actually hold that album up against the classic Grateful Dead 1977 Cornell shows, like all. I would say that was another high point. So the question is not, can Burning Man still deliver a transformative experience? The answer is hell yes. Yep. The question is just, what's its hit rate?
Yeah. And
how many times you have to go and wade through some of the other stuff versus just the absolute walk off, bases loaded grand slam.
Yeah, here's a couple of my thoughts. One thought is, one thing that I still know is cool is the fact that the majority of the people there are radically different. Like there's a certain buy-in level for most of the people. Like people that you would normally see, like there's a couple guys, and I mentioned this on a podcast before, huge guys, 6'10", 300, looks like they spent all day in the gym just taking steroids.
And hanging out at District.
Yeah. And they're out dancing. And then normally that would be like, oh man, that guy's probably a meathead, like probably steer clear of that guy.
Yeah.
But I gave this dude a puff of mapacho and he looks at me and he smiles and he gives me a big old hug, like just a big old bear hug from a giant techno Viking guy.
Nice.
And like that's the pleasant surprise you see with some people. So that gives me hope. Yep. The other thing is still no trash on the ground, which is like, you go to all these other festivals, it's just people just shit everywhere. Done with this cigarette, done with this, blah, 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 just throwing stuff.
Yes.
Still the playa is clean.
Yep.
So there's like still some buy-in. Now, what gives me real concern, which I think is a sign of the times in the world, we go to the man burn, right? And everybody's sitting down. And some people decide they want to stand up.
Oh, you were part of that drama too? We had some of that.
Yes. So some people decide they want to stand up.
Yeah.
And then, so the people behind them start yelling at the people in the front. And that makes the people in the front who are standing angry. This one guy had a sciatic issue. He's like, I'm not fucking standing. And then other people are going, it's your burn, man. Do what you want. And other people are like, sit down.
Yes.
And then people in the back start throwing stuff at the people standing up. All of this happening right before the man is supposed to burn, right? And it's just conflict. And we're stuck in the middle as stuff's flying over our head, like objects are trying to hit the people standing up. People are chanting and yelling.
Yes.
And finally I was like, let's just fucking go. Like we were all opened up and on the right medicines and like, we're out of here.
Yeah.
And then we start walking away and everybody's like, oh, sorry, man. You know, sorry about those guys in front. And I wanted to be like, no, it's not the fucking guys in front. It's you assholes throwing stuff at the guys in front.
Yeah.
And the guys in front. Yeah. But
it's the whole
thing.
Undifferentiated shit show of it. Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the ultimate challenges is like, how do we deal with this kind of division and conflict that continues to arise? And even in Burning Man, you know, it's still there. The conflict between the plug and plays and the burner earned rolled in the dust and sleep in a fucking mud cocoon. I don't know what you got to do to meet their criteria of morality. And then the people who want to sit down while some want to stand and they can't come to terms. Like that's an interesting thing.
And fundamentally, kind of like sort of fierce, rugged individualism, you know, is the nominal outside of it, but it's fundamentally narcissistic identity politics. Like no one's the boss of me.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to shut this down. And yeah, I mean, so I was just kind of loosely thinking, this is off the top of my head, but like the things that moved me so profoundly when I first got to experience basically the entire thing, the city, the culture, the experience were several. One was obviously the beautiful art installations and the true kind of like Dr. Seussian magic. In fact, we just went and watched Close Encounters in this movie theater again because it's like the 40th anniversary and it's out and playing right now. So we took our kids and there's that opening scene in the crazy ass desert and like those 4 like Baba black sheep wildcats that were lost in the Bermuda Triangle in World War II show up in the desert. And there's also a ship that shows up in the desert. And I'm like, oh, fuck yeah. And even just the crazy multicolored UFOs. And I was kind of elbowing, my son. I was like, dude, so much of the inspiration for the playa at night, I think came from Close Encounters. Like there was that amazing exhibit, I think it was probably 2011 or maybe 2012, where there was the dock and then the half sunken ship in the playa that looked as if it had been buried over time. Yeah. And again, obviously all the colors and the LED on the art cards, that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, what an interesting legacy of that kind of like childhood delight for many of the artists. And so for me, there were a couple of markers I've been tracking. One was the degree of truly awe-inspiring large scale art. And there was the tree of Tenaya, that beautiful LED lit tree.
Two trees, which were amazing. There was the heart resonance,
the Illumina one.
Yeah,
and that was Mayan Warrior. That was the Mexico City crew who also built our Flow Dojo stuff for Flow Camp. So it was a really neat thing to see those guys. And they had biometrics. They had hot math, HRV involved in it, and that was super super cool. But in general, I would say the truly like massive scale, jaw droppers I saw less of. And
I agree with that.
I was just curious about that. I mean, what are the fundamentally socioeconomics of the large scale art installations? How have they been done in the past? We, full cop, camped out on K Street, so like the row of fortress camps. We were like, we camped with dear friends that are part of Robot Heart and like Mai Tai and that kind of kite surfing and VC scene. So we ended up, against our better judgment, camping out in basically plug and play land.
Yeah,
and that entire street is just nothing but 30-foot RVs, 18-wheelers, everything's walled off, right? And you go down and, Guy La Liberté, the founder of Cirque du Soleil's camp, Red Moon, like it was just all of that, right? Yeah. It was all that. And so we experienced far less of our camp is open and delightful. It was our camp is utilitarian and bare bones, or the cool shit is walled off and for wristband holders only.
Right.
So there was a lot less of the delight, the stumble upon delight. And then I was also, and the architecture for me. So like the architecture, I mean, obviously it's a loser's game to pick when was there a cultural high point, but as a cultural anthropologist, like which was my academic training, I can't help but see it in those lines. I would, depending on what you want, if you talk to Android Jones, he would say, I think I've heard, in conversations, he's been like, I think 2007 was kind of peak of the freshness of the both musical scene, the kind of leather and feather art design culture, the clothing aesthetic, right? But then certainly by 2011, 2012, there was some, what I found just jaw-droppingly beautiful post-apocalyptic architecture. It involved a lot of the tensile structures, a lot of the bamboo, a lot of those things, to the point where I remember the first year I went was, I think, 2011. And I remember thinking, Red Lightning's rad. It's totally dialed. They have a bunch of teepees and they have beautiful tensile structures, but I didn't even rank those as the top as far as interesting, truly innovative architecture. And at the time, that was like Fractal Nation. It was Sacred Spaces. There were a handful of folks that were just progressing. What kind of portable but gorgeous structures do we live in and dwell in?
Yeah.
In a celebratory space. And I saw much less of that. And it's gone much more utilitarian. And you sort of see, and to your point about White Ocean, I was like, well, what are the major camps? Because it used to be that the major camps were reflecting year-round communities of burners in San Francisco, in LA, to some extent even in New York, other major hotbeds. And there was sometimes they had patrons, invariably. I mean, they always have since the Medicis, right? Art has always had patronage. But there was also an awful lot of community sourcing. And what I noticed was you could drive by a lot of the big ass sound cams, and the sound cams weren't as dialed out. Like they were often just big fucking sound stacks onto open desert versus here's an entryway, you move through an entry arch, you come into a place that's a space that's bounded for community, etc. And so I saw what felt like more dollars thrown at an event or an installation or a sound camp, and less vibrant meat on the bones as far as a community around that specific camp or vibe. So that was one I was like, are we shifting from the era of crowdsourced community art, installations, exhibits, gifting in the form of the things they build and what they invite people into, the degree of permissibility for me to enter just as a regular punter off the street. Like, am I allowed in here or not? Right. And then also a number of those sound camps, like conspicuously empty at peak times, which to me would suggest, and it's just like a DJ playing like emo deep house, just like weird non-danceable sounds.
Right.
And you're like
surprising amount of that. Yeah.
We got to dance, like actually spontaneously shake our asses for literally 7 minutes. And it was at a sunrise.
Yeah.
at the tree of Tenere, and I don't know the name of this particular archive, but there was some dude playing some cumbia, like badass shit. And it was literally as the sun was coming up, I was like, oh, hey, we're going to have some church. Like, fuck yes. Here's our son. We get to actually show him this is our community. And we dance ourselves into recognition of ourselves and each other. And then as the sun came up, you suddenly looked around. Then for some reason, inexplicably, he stopped playing danceable shit, started playing more kind of weird sounds, non-danceable sounds. And then you kind of look around and you start seeing people all kind of jagged out and people taking bumps of K or doing whatever they were doing. And it suddenly went to the land of hungry ghosts in an instant. And Julie, my wife, was just like, oh, look what just happened. And I suddenly looked around and I was like, oops. That was a little window.
It was interesting because we went with such a crew, and our tribe, I think the environment, the pressure, the whole freedom of the whole thing, it brought our group so tight together that we were almost in our own bubble of closeness. That people would come in and out, like you guys are calling, or some other people would come inside the bubble, but that bubble was fucking magic.
That's awesome.
And I think that's really the way to now navigate Burning Man, is to create this thing. And that happened a little bit last year too, where the people that you're with, even the time you spend in the RV becomes magic. Because there's absolutely not fuck all to do. You have no reception, total freedom, access to everything, no itinerary. And that kind of that specialness. But there's the vibe is definitely, it didn't feel like one group this time. It didn't feel like Burning Man was together. There's a whole variety of things. And I think also the medicine it's so weirdly accessible now, like DMT vape pens everywhere. People going off. I mean, you're just dancing. I mean, I'm dancing to Diplo and smelling DMT vape pens. And I'm like, Diplo, DMT, like, probably not my choice of, I don't want to be judgy or anything, but like maybe not the right spot for that, and, but nonetheless, like, it's just a weird fucking thing. And I think it'll continue, and maybe it'll get reloaded, maybe like some of the old ideas, all right, it's not going to be that, but maybe it'll reload with a new thing that'll be rad.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't get to go because we were running a flow camp. Our intention was to also go to the Oregon Eclipse, right, which was the gathering of all the offshoot transformational festivals, like all clearly carrying Burning Man DNA into the varying festivals, everything from Envision to Symbiosis to, all those, Shambhala, all those others. And I hope that it was beautiful. And I don't know whether that took some of the wind out of the sails of Burning Man. I wasn't sure. I was like, either this is going to be an absolutely epic year because everyone's just going to roll the party, the music, the art, the architecture from one to the other, or people will have shot their wads right in Oregon and Burning Man will be a little on kind of like, on the low tide mark. But to your point, like, yeah, there were people loosely affiliated with our camp. They were just roaming around with DMT pens and nitrous canisters and just casually kind of huffing and puffing through the day. And you're sort of like, what the fuck? You're neither getting to the interesting places nor letting your body recharge and reload for another true peak experience. So it felt like people were just kind of on perma-trip seeking.
Yeah.
And to your point about like, close like core pods roaming but not necessarily fully integrated, I felt like there was two kind of markers of that. One was the temple to me was the least focused temple I've seen it, and weirdly it was I only read this after the fact, but it was provided by PG&E. Like all the wood, it looked like basically a Jenga block tower that was like 3/4 done. And it was small, it wasn't profoundly lit, so it wasn't like a waypoint during the nighttime. It wasn't like, oh, I orient myself literally and metaphysically off that. So that was, and there was no center inside the temple. It was just a patch of dirt. And in every other year, there's been something profound in the middle of the temple that focuses and one year there was like this suspending giant like stone thing that kind of came down to a point.
Oddly, but not.
Yeah, and then the man was in a fucking cage, like he was in a house. It was really curious because, right? I mean, to me, like that's another thing is like Burning Man gets generally categorized as this kind of like raucous pagan festival, and
kind of right.
Yeah, clearly, but I also think there's a massively like crypto-Christian element to it, which is like the sacrificial king. And he presides over the entire thing all week. He's literally there watching you no matter where you are. Everybody orients off him. And then comes the bloodlust. Bring us Barabbas, right? There's the moment come Saturday night that everyone's like, burn, motherfucker, burn. Like, we want to see you go down. And there is that, and then always he kind of raises his arms, before the fire comes on, which was a weird pump fake because he did it this year like 15 minutes before anything else fucking happened, which I thought was super curious. But my sense is that the temple was no longer, at least for me and us, who was no longer the place of like hushed awe and reverence.
It still had that.
Yes, I guarantee you that happened for folks. I mean, maybe it was just that I fell in love with some prior experiences and didn't have it this time. But to me, on like the sort of spiritual architecture of the place, I noticed that was potentially absent day one, and then I also noticed the lack of cohesion you talked about throughout. And then so the other side of it would be, I also noticed a fuck ton of people on e-bikes. Right. And I would say probably 90% of the folks on eBay. And by the way, we rode some. Colin had a couple of like specialized full-on stump jumper badass e-bikes, which were rad. They were the coolest. Like, you want to talk about like a technologically enabled psychedelic upgrade? Try ripping around at 30 miles an hour, right? Absolutely blowing and going at 3 a.m. And the funny thing about that was, I mean, this is just a fun tangent, but it actually It was a psychedelic upgrade. You had to change your frame rate of visual processing because you're moving so much faster than you normally were pedaling that now you're like seeing the playa in like chunks of like a quarter mile. And if people are trying to follow you, you can no longer actually track who's behind you because you're moving so fast. It was like suddenly hopping in an F-16 and ripping around, which was absolutely one of the highlights. But I would say 90% of the people on e-bikes, they weren't their e-bikes. They were provided as stables and plug-and-play cams.
Yeah.
And so when we saw people roaming up and down the streets, there was far less of the, hey, how are you? Anyone I talk to is going to be the subject of a beautiful human encounter, and more like heads down, I, me, mine, we're going to go get ours. And that was I think, subtle but fairly pronounced watershed.
I think, I mean, I think it's a sign of the times. I think right now, everything is getting divided. And I think you can't just blame the right. You got to look at the left too. You got to look at not only are we saying, we're not saying everybody is one. We're saying even our genders, we got to divide it into 28 different fucking categories. And if you get the category wrong in New York,
shame on you.
You're going to get $200,000 fine, or you're going to get shamed, or you're going to do this. You can't wear anybody else's shit. You can't do anything. It's like mine. Feathers, nope, can't do that. Dreadlocks, nope, can't do that. Oh, are you listening to reggae? Are we even allowed to listen to reggae now? Or like, what the fuck can we do and what we can't do? Who is this? Are you a him, her, he, she, whatever? It's all nonsense because we're all fucking one.
Yes.
And we've gone opposite of that and fractured into a billion different things so that our ego can be superior to every other little differentiation that
in my wounding. And I mean, it's so funny that this is up for you too, because this is like literally all I've been thinking about for the last 5 weeks. And I'm actually going to end up working it into my next book because I think it's so pernicious and problematic, which is that the identity politics of the alt-left surrounding fundamentally victimization and fundamentally the primacy of my pain and my process, right? Trumping anything bigger that we might all bow down to and or step into, I think is antithetical to the path of ecstasis, right? I mean, so we wrote about it in Stealing Fire. We said, hey, by the way, you can have these peak experiences, and they seem to do two things. One is they seem to, it's like almost famous, when he's tripping balls and he's standing up on the roof and he's like, I am a golden god, I'm on drugs, right? So there's that dichotomy, which is like, on the one hand, we realize, oh, we're golden gods, awesome. And oh, by the way, we could use a little work. And here's all the places I'm still banged up, broken, wounded. And in letting go of our egoic personal stories of wounding, letting go of the separateness, connecting in communitas, we realize, oh, all those stories are no longer needed. My mommy might not have loved me enough. My dad might have been an abusive alcoholic. I might have had a really hard time in school because I was ADD or just like whatever, right?
And my ancestors might have got fucked by another group of ancestors.
Exactly, as they always did.
Yep.
And yet, I've found my way, by hook, crook, or the grace of God, into this state of wholeness. Amen. Therefore, and quite often the experience of ecstasis means like I cannot second guess any of the pain on my path that got me to this amazing place. Therefore, like if I got to this place via my road of wounding, then everything on my road is redeemed.
100%.
Right? And
it formed you.
Exactly. So I can't second guess anything. And if what got me here included pain and suffering, but it got me here, then it is all rendered holy. And you've got people on the doorstep of that ecstatic experience now saying, no, fuck no, I want a full accounting and I want what's mine.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like Sally and Charlie Brown. I think it's the Christmas special, or maybe it's the Halloween, where she's like, I just want what's mine. I just want my fair share. I just want what's coming to me, right? And it's like, fuck you. No, you don't. You self-indulgent little shit. Because now we are getting that acquisitive, egoic seeking of the transcendent state, which used to just obliterate everybody and leave us dancing with our brothers and sisters, and is now much more. I mean, God, we were at one art installation. And there was this couple, poor bastards that they were. And it was a hot-ass woman and a weedy-ass guy. So you just had to assume, I mean, and again, people can flame me in the comments if they want, but my assumption would be, dude makes bank, and he basically is renting a hot girlfriend. And because he clearly is not an alpha. He wasn't, right. I mean, and in the sort of Ayn Randian sense, right. The objectivism, like he was not the alpha to her hottie alpha. Yep. And yet they had these ridiculously complicated outfits, probably $10,000 each, like with feathers. It was all white, and they had LEDs baked in, and clearly they didn't make them. They did not pick that shit up on Etsy. It was probably waiting in their wardrobe in their RV, right? But what they were doing is they were taking selfies of themselves.
Yeah.
And they were clearly not dusty, clearly not in the experience, and they didn't know what to fucking do with themselves. Like they'd acquired all the trinkets and signs and signifiers of transformational culture, and yet had just rented it and were lost.
Yeah.
And I almost wanted to give them a hug or a bitch slap. I couldn't figure out which,
They're all hoarding currency, which is what the ego likes to do, either actual monetary currency or social currency, which they think they can get through likes on Instagram and these things. It's this hunger that will never be subsided, never be filled, because ultimately it is a ghost. You talk about the hungry ghost. The ego is the ultimate ghost. It's not really real. The real self inside us is something that has everything. The ego is trying to claim that, trying to be that, but is ultimately a fiction. Yeah. This identity that we've created, that we're constantly trying to figure out, who am I? Who am I? You're life. You're God. You're everything. You're love.
Yeah.
You know, and if you go looking for yourself, you're just going to find somebody looking for yourself.
Exactly. And that same archetype of that couple we saw played out on several sunrises. Yeah. Like literally, whatever the varying art cars, the robot heart cliche. I mean, literally, someone rode past me and asked, "Do you know which way Robot Heart is?" And I honestly God thought it was a fucking joke. Like, where's Daft Punk playing? I thought it was like, and I was like, "Are you serious? Like, you're really asking me that at sunrise?" But we saw again conspicuously clean but fabulously costumed folks wandering through the crowds with a fucking photographer in tow. And they clearly were not models. This was not a Vogue shoot. This wasn't for W. And they literally had brought along someone to document. And then, of course, they were like clearly seeking, can I get in the right spot in the crowd? And then they'd turn on, like, oh, look at us, pretending we're having fun to capture the Insta snap. And I thought, oh, fuck, that's what this has come to. So as much as anything else, what I noticed, and I mean, even back, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there was clearly the emergence of leather and feather egotism. And whether that was like the Abraxas crew or the Robot Heart crew or stuff being like, we're fucking pretty badass. We're all woke. We're all gorgeous, young, healthy, fit. And we are tricked out in the baddest ass fucking garb of our archetypal selves. And, oh, by the way, we've become self-aware of how awesome we are. Mm-hmm. Right? But at least that was within the transformational culture itself. What I noticed this year, and again, I'm sure it's been present and developing, I just hadn't seen it in such contrast, was now there's a second layer of ego. Now you got folks rolling in saying, I want a piece of that, but my egoic tendency is actually front country.
Well, you see it with people who drink ayahuasca as like a spiritual Boy Scout badge.
Yes.
It's like something that they can put on their sleeve, like, oh, I did that. You haven't done that? Oh, and that's the whole purpose of them doing that. Any type of transformational thing you can harvest as a way to claim some type of superiority.
Yes.
But then, so I think the real question though is how do we love, shake, hug these people back to real awakenedness and really not, instead of saying, they're lost. Like how can we actually, if the transformational festival itself may not be able to do it now.
Yeah.
And maybe even some of the medicines, some of the drugs are kind of being marginalized co-opted, in a certain way. Like, what are the tools what's the next set of tools that we have? Is it just going to be the discomfort that they're going to feel, their own suffering that's going to have to bring them back? Yeah. Or is there another way that we can create something that's ultimately undeniable?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I mean, sometimes I feel like just burying my head in my hands and saying, fuck it. Right. And just, taking me and everyone I love up into the, backcountry of British Columbia and building an off-the-grid homestead and just letting the whole fucking thing burn to the ground, which was actually my plan 20 years ago. And then we had our son. And on the day he was born, I became an optimist again. I was like, okay, now I'm rooting for us to figure this out. And the very fact that, back to, if Burning Man is arguably one of the most powerful transformational engines ever assembled by humans on this planet. And I think that's an if, and you could put Kumbh Mela in India, you could put a handful of other events, but not many. It's a super short list, that scale and that potency. And you can say and then certainly the concentration of ecstatic techniques assembled within it, music, dance, art, ruggedness, isolation, psychedelics in droves, sexuality, all of it. You can say virtually no transformational culture has ever just bunged all of them together like that. Most cultures have only ever had one, maybe two at max. And you're saying, okay, so if we've thrown the kitchen sink at blowing people out of their egos and creating communitas, and even that has been co-opted by egoic hungry ghosts seeking, we're fucked fundamentally. And that's it. Like that, this was our best shot. And the fact that you said Aya is showing up a little bit as a Boy Scout merit badge, and it's almost like ayahuasca is fucking passe. Ayahuasca is like 2010. What's now is 5-MeO, and everybody's like, oh, the toad, blah, 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 right? And so people are experiencing that as the new merit, the coolest merit badge of them all. And even that isn't cracking people open, even though it's obliterating egos pretty much 100% of the time.
I think the last remaining piece is a radical reevaluation of social structure.
Yes.
And I think the tools will ultimately, I think the tools themselves can't be used alone, but I think the tools in combine with your own tribe. And so thinking back to why Burning Man was such a powerfully transformative experience for us is because we came with the tribe.
Yes.
And the tribe insulated itself. The tribe supported itself. The love that we were able to share, the transformation that we had, the talks we had, the intention we did, the toasts we made, the hugs we had, the words and the inspiration that we had in front of the tree, that worked. It moved. And even people who are having their own tough time and would have maybe wanted to spiral off into other things, the strength of the group brought them all back in so that it held the container for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the only hope. I think at this point, we have to change this solipsistic nuclear family, me and my wife in one home, and that's all we ever have. Maybe we see our friends every once in a while, but we don't really have time, and we're exhausted and we're stressed, and maybe we'll go out on the weekend. We got to reevaluate all that, and we got to get back to some more modern tribal identity where you have a clan of people that hold you accountable, that you do, and then the rituals will work again. When the group brings that intention forward and you're part of that group, then I think all the tools will work.
Yeah, and back to your kind of initial question of like, how might we shift this, steer this, in some respects, redeem it, or and of course, obviously, anybody engaged in full spiritual bypassing will go, oh, you're so deluded. There's nothing that needs redeeming. Everything's perfect and unfolding. And you're like, yes, and, right? Yes, and, maybe. But yeah, I think it's twofold. One is what you just described, which is rituals. So all ecstatic techniques up until the last 50 years have been highly encoded and encultured, and with checks and balances. So the idea is not, I get to do this rad shit anytime I want, for as long as I want, as often as I want, regardless of what I'm taking out of it. It was, you have a rite of passage when you come of age in your late teens. You have a rite of passage when you're married, a rite of passage when you become a warrior, a rite of passage when you die, a rite of passage all the way through. And access to those techniques of ecstasy was closely circumscribed and overseen within cultural guidelines.
Yeah.
Here's what it's for. Here's what you're expected to get from it. And here's your integration and increased responsibility as you're brought back into culture on the other side of that rite of passage, which none of that exists these days. So back to your identity politics and the problems with the alt-left and all that kind of stuff, which is, if my process and my experiences are sacrosanct, basically they're at the top of the mountain, there's nothing bigger than me that I defer to or acknowledge, we're hosed.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, it is just Hungry Ghost on steroids now, versus any escaping of those shackles. But the flip side is, like, also because we were up in the mountains of Utah and then straight to Burning Man, like we also missed the second half of Game of Thrones, right? So we came home, right? And we watched the tag end of that season. And as I was trying to articulate the problem with this identity politics, right? Which is literally antithetical to the path of ecstasis and wholeness and collective awareness and love.
Yeah.
I was like, oh shit, this is Jon Snow or Cersei. Right? I mean, the notion of winter's coming, motherfuckers. And either we realize that the old game of Westeros, right, is an old game. I mean, in fact, Jaime Lannister kind of embodied it. It's like, this is no longer about our houses.
Yeah.
This is about the living and the dead. Right? And that moment is, I think, kind of where we are, and if not immediately right now, because we spent some time with some of the folks that are deeply involved in assessing existential threats to the world right now, right? And it was a conversation you and I had before August, right?
Yep.
And those guys a month ago were saying, according to their best calculations, it's 96 months until we are literally at, does humanity survive the century or not? Which is now 95 months. And in between Flow Camp in Utah and Burning Man, I stopped in Squaw Valley to speak at a sustainability conference. And David Suzuki, who's a leading professor and kind of ecological sustainability guy, actually he said something comparable. He said, everyone I'm talking to in the ecological space, and this is just in the ecological space, not in the AI, not in the asymmetrical threats, not in bioterror, not in CRISPR gene editing, not in 1,000 other places we can blow ourselves up. Just in ecology, he said, the leading experts I'm talking to give us 3 to 4 years, and that those actions that we take or don't take in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the next century. So either way we look at it, and I think the odds are exceptionally high, winter is coming, and we choose not to set aside our personal pain and our identity politics, we're all going to be experiencing an exponential world of hurt, right? So we can quibble We can quibble, but the White Walkers are coming.
Yep.
And that, I think, is ultimately, like, if we don't figure this shit out, it is going to get figured out for us. And my concern, which I think is, I mean, among many, i.e. starting with, like, do we actually even make it, is given, if we can't even get our shit straight before the storm comes, are we going to be able to maintain coherence when things actually start getting hairy?
I don't know if anybody's ever got their shit straight before the storm. It almost always takes the storm to really, truly inspiration or desperation, right? That's what motivates people. And we wish that it was inspiration that could really move the masses, but it's not. Usually it's desperation, and there will be some who make it, some who don't, but that will activate the largest number of people. So I think it's going to have to be the combination of these inspirational techniques, combination of a reevaluation of community and tribe, and the White Walkers just got a motherfucking blue fire breathing dragon, and they're coming through the wall.
Like it was already hairy enough.
And they're coming through the wall, and now we got to figure some shit out. And I think that's ultimately maybe what's necessary. Maybe all of these things are exactly what we need. We needed the alt-left to go extreme. We needed Trump to go extreme. We needed everybody to create such madness that ultimately that is the conduit for the White Walkers. That's what allows all of these things to kind of come through, this non-rational separatism thinking, then we needed that. And that's the only hope that we actually have. And so in that way, we can look out at winter and say, winter's coming. Thank God, it's about time, because we need to do something. You know what I mean? And maybe that's the optimistic way to look at it.
Yeah, and it might even just be what is actually happening. So like our specific philosophical orientation to it is almost secondary. Like if it's what's going down, and then you get to the question of like Yankee ingenuity versus like I think it's a widely critiqued sociological thesis, but fundamentally like the latitude phenomenon that folks in the tropics, because they've never had to prepare for winter, right? We're like indigenous tribes and cultures, et cetera, were just fundamentally less industrious. They didn't need to. Yeah. They didn't need to figure out clothing, shelter, heat, all these kind of things, right? Storage of food, because it was always just living in Eden versus kind of, good old fashioned Yankee ingenuity of like, we actually have to figure shit out because there's times of lean and there's times of plenty in our life. I think my sense is
like public transit is on point in Scandinavia.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it is not on point in the Caribbean.
Yeah, and of course, like, and historically 1,000 and other confounding factors and the legacies of colonialism, blah blah blah. But like that notion of when we can just kick it and get away with being sloppy. And I would say I noticed that in hippie culture, like the difference between like, and even just going to dead shows out west, right? Colorado hippies, significantly more on point than California hippies.
Yeah.
Because if you lived in Colorado, you clearly weren't living on the flats. You were living in the mountains. A disproportionate number of them had wilderness medicine training, avalanche training. They actually were like, the thing we love to do can kill us.
Yeah.
And therefore we've trained our games a bit versus I just camp out on the beach, right? Smoking weed and going surfing.
I think comfort is the worst thing that's ever happened to our world. And I think it's on everybody now. Maybe large external discomfort is coming and that will force this action, but those who are going to be ready are pushing themselves into discomfort frequently and regularly through the plants, through physical, enduring physical conditions, through regular Wim Hof practice, dip yourself in the fucking ice bath, do the breaths when they're uncomfortable, put yourself in emotionally challenging situations, see what you're made of when every part of you wants to break and you want to cry under your table, get to that point. And then you'll be ready for when winter comes. Then you're that person that can lead when everything else is in chaos.
Yeah, and that to me is like, that's an interesting cultural thread, because did we talk about like 300 and like the movie?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I never saw it when it came out, and then I was just bored on a plane 6 months ago and I watched it and I was like, what a wild, like, crypto patriotic post 9/11, like against is like Clash of Civilizations kind of battle it is. Like the subtext is all just plain. But then I realized, look at CrossFit culture, look at Spartans and Tough Mudders and that whole thing, all the way into what you're doing here at On It, right? Into Joe and that community and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, there's a bunch of people, not all of whom overlap. with psychedelic burner culture. Some of them are coming out of the military space. Some of them are coming out of the first responder and firefighter space. Some are just coming out like, I want more. But in some respects, like intuitively, because I think I remember reading an Outside magazine. It was somebody in the CrossFit organization saying, "Oh, we didn't know what we were training for until obstacle course racing came." Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, that's like, and that was neat. That was its little moment, right? It had its 3 years or so of buzz. But that notion of, we've been training intuitively. We don't know what it's for. Yeah. Right. But we're waiting. We're kind of like locked and loaded and waiting. And clearly that's clearly happening on the alt-right as well. Yeah. Right. The preppers and the kind of Bannon fourth turning, all that kind of stuff. Like, I think
it's the difference between external preparation and internal preparation.
Yes.
Right. Preppers are externally preparing, so that they have food supplies, but have they internally prepared themselves for how they're going to live in a fucking hole for 3 years without going crazy and killing each other?
Exactly.
Maybe they haven't done that internal work.
They've externalized their interiority in shadow projection of the other.
Yep.
Right, so they're not doing it. They've just outsourced it to brown folks, right? And then created culture wars. But you're right, and I would, actually, like, hats off to what you guys are doing and what you're representing, which is kind of that Venn overlap of saying, let us engage in physical training, let us valorize suffering and adversity in service of strength. And oh, by the way, let's combine that with balls out interior development. Mm-hmm. To me, that's actually the most encouraging. Like, the space you're in is one of the ones that gives me some of the most hope that somebody is fucking doing a fully dimensioned developmental approach.
I think that's the only way. And I love that prepper analogy. I had never thought of that before, but we all need to be doomsday preppers, but not in the way of 500 pounds of beef jerky and all the cans of cream corn that you can possibly fit in a hovel. We need to be internal doomsday preppers, like all of the skills that you potentially need emotionally, psychologically, socially, the group that you can rely on, all of these things, because we don't know what fucking threat's going to come, and we don't know how it's going to happen. We don't know which one of the myriad ways it'll come. And guess what? Even if there is no big threat, all of these micro ones that, would maybe shatter your old self won't shatter your new self if you start to do that work. These things that would break you only cause you to bend and come back stronger. Yeah. That's the name of the game. So whether it's a big macro event or just all of the micro events that you will personally encounter, fucking be a prepper.
Yeah. And three things that I can sort of use to wrap my head around that, because people often just like get into like cognitive freeze when faced with that. They're like, wait a second, if there's a structural break coming where business is no longer even remotely as usual, how do I continue optimizing my life within the existing game, or don't I? Right. And to leave the game prematurely seems stupid and foolish. And then you're like Seventh-day Adventist sitting on your roof waiting for the right, waiting for the rapture. Yeah. Or I'm the last man standing and I'm like the dude in Pompeii who's turned to ash reading the morning newspaper. I don't want to be either of those guys. Yeah. Right. And so my sense would be is good old Pareto split. What's the 80-20? What is the 20% of actual physical, practical, real world preparation I could do that's going to absolve me of 80% of suffering? Yeah. And coming from like mountaineering, backcountry guiding, that kind of stuff, it's really straightforward. It's like, do you have reliable power? Do you have the access to water and a sustainable food supply and communications? And if you can just take care of the basics of that in your life, you don't need to go full fucking Idaho nut job, right? You can say, hey, we have done the common sense logical thing. And that could just be for a hurricane event, a weather event, or it could be for systemic, social collapse. The other is, Amory Levins at the Rocky Mountain Institute, who's like one of the original godfathers of sustainability, did all this stuff for the DOD, for Walmart, for all this kind of stuff. And he's got his home, which is an earthship up in the mountains in Aspen. And it's like at 8,600 feet, and he grows bananas inside. And his model, and he's just kind of one of these wild ass savants. I mean, he's off the charts as far as his creativity and innovation. But his notion is drawbridging. Build your castle and have a drawbridge that engages the world as it is. And then if you need to, you can crank that fucker up, right? When things get hairy. But you get to take those precautions, but you don't absent yourself from the larger project. Right. But you can rest assured that, hey, if we get to the 11th hour, I have covered for that as well, which lets me actually play full out for the collective much longer without having to get distracted. And the final one is my writing partner, Stephen Collar. Whenever we were writing Stealing Fire, he repeatedly said, and it's something he's leaned on in his career as a writer, which is like, the answer is always in the text. right? And so if everything we've just discussed, like let's go all the way back to the Argon eclipse, to the potential moral decay or decline of Burning Man, and the rise of multi-layered egotism, both in the core crew, like Leather and Feathers, we're just so awesome, we just get lost in our own reflections, and also the outside seekers who have experienced it as an object and want to come in and get their piece. We might say, okay, well, what's actually happening? And to me, the place is an element of what could be a future that works is what's already happening, which is Burning Man DNA has now rolled out into all these additional festivals, several of which are going beyond temporary leave no trace into permanent leave our mark, make our mark. So it'd go from leave no trace to make our mark. And you see that with Boomfest in Portugal, right? They own the land. They're every other year. So they have a fallow year, which I think is genius. And they're also continually building out permaculture, sustainability, gardens, solar power, all these things, and saying, this is who we are. Now, just like the Lakota or any Plains tribe back in the day, they would get together in the times of plenty, right? Where the buffalo grass was high and you could feed all your horses and everything was lush and there was tons of bison to hunt. And you get together in 50,000, 100,000 groups of people and throw down.
Yeah.
This is who we are. This is when we mate. We marry, we plan war councils, we tell our sacred stories, we reaffirm our collective identity, and then we disperse as the biomass and available energy through the year gets scanter, all the way from tribes to bands to families living up some little creek next to the willows, right? And then we reconvene. So that kind of ebb and flow based on available energy, and the idea of this DNA now spreading bioregionally, so that you have permanent and flexibly attended populations around these things that become increasingly, back to the drawbridging idea, increasingly self-sufficient sustainability projects. Now, worst case scenario, we've all just got cool hobbies and awesome places to go hang,
Yeah.
right? But if needed, those become lifeboats for a future, and maybe even star arcs. Maybe we're even gathering the folks that are going to be able to make a transition to an inflection point in consciousness and culture we can't honestly predict or plan for from this side of it.
Sounds like the fucking battle plan to me. That sounds it. Do the internal work, do the external work, do it all. Find your tribe. Make sure that you have a community that is, no one, even if you could survive alone, is it really worth it?
Yeah.
We got to bring people with us. We got to find those that are our chosen family, take them into ritual with you, take them into battle with you, however that looks, whether it's your adventure races or whether it's your ayahuasca ceremony or whether it's your Burning Man or whatever. Go to these ecstatic experiences with your tribe, get those bonds stronger, find out what love really is without possession, without ego. See them all as you living that different life, really see them as that. And when half of your group, fractures, don't talk shit about the other half to make you feel better, and try and avoid those common traps that we all find ourselves in to make ourselves belong. The dark side of tribalism, which is saying we are this and everybody else is shit. Find the good side, the heart side of that. And then, look out into that storm and say, all right, motherfucker, do your worst. I've done my best. I've done my piece. I've lived in a way that if it is my day to die, today is a good motherfucking day to die. Because I'm going to do it with my brothers and my sisters and my family, and I'm going to live my life, and I've prepared the best I can. So let's go.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Exactly. No, exactly. I mean, I think that's fundamentally it, is that we have been so absolved from the notion of our mortality. And what does it mean to today's a good day to die? That's not a sentimental death wish, right? I mean, that is a warrior's clarity, which is my house is in order.
Yeah.
And the question.
And I've fucking lived so much. I've tasted. I've fucking kissed the mouth of a lover that I was fucking insanely mad and enraptured with. I've smelled all of the foods and the sweet grass blowing in the breeze and gone out of my mind on the peyote and hiked and hunted and fucking danced with my brothers and done all the things.
Yeah.
And so that when that moment comes, you can smile and go, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Life was good.
Exactly. And like those guys had it sorted, because I mean, they did their vision quest and often, not always, but often they were shown the day they died. Right. Yep. And so really they just spend their life living out the middle chapter, which is waiting until the signs are like, oh shit, this might be this is the day.
Yeah.
And what they experience is not fear, not avoidance, but actually like jubilation. Like, today's the day I die. Hot damn. Now let me actually lay down my life, right, for the greatest good in the greatest number with the greatest honor. And I like, that's like the look. I mean, and I'm bringing up Lakota because that was my grad school background. I studied with Vine Deloria Jr., who was one of their elders, and it was at CU. So it was like the whole aftermath of the American Indian movement, and like, so politically active, academically baller, actually indigenous folks actually reclaiming their own stories. So that's where these stories formally come from. But one of them was the Owl Society, and the Owl Society were the sash warriors, and they were the ones who would stake themselves to a sash on the battlefield on a given day. And they were like the absolute, one of the most revered warrior societies. And it basically meant, I'm going to drive this stake into the ground. I'm going to tie myself to it. And today's either the day I die, right? Or I'm last man standing. And the only other outcome, to your point about true community, is the only way I can be absolved from that dialectic, last man standing or dead in glory, is to be freed by another member of the Owl Society. Right. So, and I think that metaphor is so beautiful, right? The only thing that lets us off the hook is actually the love and attentiveness of our band of brothers and sisters. And that notion of practicing resurrection, the idea of like, if in those moments of ecstasis, which, and I think you can make a clear case, all ecstatic practices are death practices, right? We die to our ego, we die to our story, we die to our pain, we even die to our pleasure, our seeking, our preferences, right? If we can practice dying such that we are absolutely clarified, we know exactly what's on the other side of that ahead of time, right? And that's true with those Hopkins studies on psilocybin with end-of-life patients and all that kind of, they all report.
I feel like I know where I'm going when I die.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a unique experience that no one can pre-wire for us or tell us what it should be. But if you've got that knowledge, that gnosis, right, then I'm just coming back to live out the middle chapters with joy, with art, with creativity. Right. And I'm no longer doing the last mile syndrome of marathon runners, you know, like that paradox in physiology where they're like, why do you run the fucking 26 mile faster than you ran the 23rd, 24th, and 25th? What were you holding back? Why didn't you just run faster the whole goddamn time? Because like all of us are holding back.
Yeah.
We're all, because we have some existential rate limiter. It's kind of the Wim Hof, right? The idea that my urge to breathe, like breathe, damn it, or you're going to die, actually kicks in when I've still got 50% oxygen in my system. It's so we don't overshoot and fuck it up and just accidentally conk out. But like, once we know what 100% offering could look like, then how much more courageously can we play?
How much more courageously can you play? That's the fucking question.
Yeah.
How much? That's up to all of us, really, right? I mean, that's the invitation. Can we live? Can we live with that full heart? Can we go out and really live? Go cross that bridge to the other side and look back and just smile and nod and say, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
We can all do that. And we just have to change our stories. We have to do the work.
Yeah.
We have to find that way. But when you do, and I feel like, man, I'm fucking closer than I ever have been. And I feel like now at 36, I'm entering like the best period of my life. And it's not because of the external things. It's entirely due to the internal things.
Yeah.
You know, and it's available for all of us. Nothing special about me that anybody else couldn't get. You know, the practices are out there. The everything is available. You know, we have access to everything. You just have to choose. You just have to choose to walk the path, get the help where you can, listen, learn, put yourself up against resistance.
Yeah.
It's all available.
Yeah, and even especially for anybody that's a fan of yours or a follower of yours or anybody who's really like leading the way and articulating a voice, you know, because we are such clever storytelling monkeys and the hungry ghost thing kicks in. Like every time we level up, like you kill the boss at one level and you fucking like I defeated my ego at one level and then it just comes back in different disguise at the next. Yeah. Like the next level of disguise is is I think the false premise or promise that all of these ecstatic techniques can leave us 100% free of pain, suffering, boredom, right? Any of those things, or conflict in our key relationships, et cetera. And so that becomes the next one. It's like, oh, I've been living a life of quiet desperation. I've been living like Neo fucking doing my desk job. And then I have the possibility of slinging bullets and learning to fly. Oh, that's going to be awesome. So now I've just created another object that I'm chasing. and that object has become the illusion or myth of my perfectibility. And if I get there, if I do enough ayahuasca, if I go to
then you
many
just
enough
bring in judgment, you bring in ego again. I realize that. I mean, I talked about this already. The ego is so slippery. It's as soon as you think you're defeating it, the ego will harness the you that thinks it's defeated the ego and then judge itself based upon the criteria of defeating itself.
Yes.
Right. It's the slipperiest motherfucker of all. So you can't really ever defeat it. You just got to love it, recognize it, and then build up the other thing that is you.
Yeah.
The other part, the counterbalance of that, which is that life which will exist eternally. The presence, the force, whatever you want to call that other aspect, the non-identity form of yourself that you are when you're in flow or when you're in ecstasis or when you're in any of these things, that thing, like whatever that thing is, just focus on being that thing and don't focus so much on the ego, because you'll never really completely defeat it. Become aware of it, love it, say, oh, look, there's my ego again, old friend. How you doing, old friend? I see you.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I'm just thinking on behalf of your listeners, right? Well, I mean, you are a unique person. It's why you've been able to do what you've been able to do, right? As far as advice that's actionable for more folks, right? Because it's one thing, like just, remember, you're a part of everything. I mean, in fact, there's a great story. How much time do we have? Is it like a 2-minute
2 minutes.
Oh, then I won't bother. But I would say like a way to inoculate, not just about can I maintain non-dual abiding, God consciousness. Oh, just remember to be that. Like it's fucking easier said than done when I'm getting hit, right? So the question for me is like, can we actually just bake in like 80% woke, 20% broke?
Yeah.
And say, hey, 80% woke, like there's this declining ROI on any of these ecstatic experiences. The first 2 or 3, game changing. The next 33, incremental, right? And if I can embrace not the myth of my own perfectibility, but the idea that I am forever human, fallible and mortal, and there's 20% of life that just is going to be tragic. We're born and we die, and in between's a bitch. We fucking raise kids that are, if we do it right, leave and never look back. We bury our parents, right? And there's the collective agony of human suffering. If we can embrace that 20% as well as table stakes, then we can get back to service. And we can say, instead of chasing 80% of the rest of my efforts for my 20% remaining perfectibility, if I can be like, hey man, who else needs a hand? Whose head is just trying to get above water? Let me engage in karma yoga. Let me engage in like the actual ethic of service. Paradoxically, instead of chasing my own happiness, I'm going to end up much more fulfilled. Because I mean, that's the hedonic paradox, right? Chasing happiness doesn't make us happy. Service tends to, the helper's high and everything else. And by the way, the world needs it and us. And isn't that not our payback for being the most blessed humans who have ever lived, including all the identity politics fuckers, like all that victim identity stuff? It's like, if we're having a conversation about post-colonial, post-modern identity politics, and I need to fucking wear a hair shirt and say, I'm cisgendered, heteronormative, please forgive me, right? We're all 1%ers. In the arc of human history, anybody who is flaming someone else on social media via their $500 smartphone is a 1%er.
Yeah.
No matter what they think, as far as how hard they've had it done by or to. And so that notion of, can we all just grow up, get on with it, take the hit as a gift, and roll our moments of, passing illumination into abiding light via helping other fellow humans figure shit out. To me, that I'd love to see. I'd love to see an ethic of service in addition to the pursuit of ecstasis.
Powerful, Jamie Wheal. You brought it, as always, my friend. That was fucking epic. Where can people find you if they want more?
flowgenomeproject.com. And we're doing tons of like in-person programs and trainings, ranging from backcountry stuff to flow camp, like with flow dojos and fun immersive trainings, and basically looking to scale an open source operating system for next level consciousness and culture. So we're going to do our part. You guys are doing your part on it.
Hell yeah.
Let's rock it.
Let's do it. Fucking have fun, people. Life is so good. Have fun. Have fun. Kiss somebody. Love somebody. Dance. Just do something fun. Enjoy yourself. Much love. Bye.